In 1972, sales hit $1.3 million. And First National Bank celebrates this by closing their credit and account. Now, Phil is in real trouble because they're about to go out of business. And if they cannot find a new source of credit, they will not be able to make their payments, they will not be able to order more shoes, and the business is over. Luckily, he is able to get a contact with Bank of California, a man called Harry White, and Harry White offers a small line of credit, basically just enough to save their company. Hello and welcome to the Swedish Wealth Institute podcast. I am Daniel Wood, your host, and welcome to part 4 of our series about Nike. We've been following the journey of Phil Knight, as how he came up with the idea of Nike, how he traveled the world, how he saw the statue, and how he met Onitsuka in Japan and realized he could start importing shoes into the United States and start selling. We followed along last week on how they started growing the company, how they doubled every single year and even opened their first location and hired their first people. This week, we're going to be following along with the growth over the years 1969, 70, 71, 72, and start touching on 73. This is a crazy time for what becomes Nike, for then Blue Ribbon Sports. And it's so exciting because what we've really followed is the growing up of the entrepreneur, Phil, and what made him unique. We followed in part 2 how he came up with the idea of his business, put things in place, and got everything ready to start. And in our last episode, we looked at really that first startup phase of how he got things going. Now we're going to follow along with the second half of that before next week we get into how Nike started, which I kind of look at as the second phase of the startup, or the second startup of Nike. This is how Blue Ribbon became. And next week, we're going to look at how Nike became. So to start off here in 1969, the company had about $300,000 of sales. Over the first 5 years of the business, they'd done about $1 million in total. And finally, Phil had the courage or confidence to leave his job in accounting and become a full-time employee. Obviously, we already had Jeff Johnson working in the business. They had other sales reps moving around. And finally, Phil joins the company. Now, the rapid growth, as you might remember, had caused problems with the banks before. And every time they were going to make a new order of shoes, he would have to negotiate with the banks, ask for more credit to be able to place bigger and bigger orders and keep that growth going. Now, this tension kept rising because they kept saying, slow down, slow down, slow down. And Phil said, no, let's go faster, faster, faster. The classic founder's dilemma. So we're going to come back to how this relationships continues to break down. The other problem was, at the same time, their orders from Onitsuka kept coming late. They kept being the wrong orders. Basically, what they started to realize was Onitsuka would prioritize local orders in Japan. And after they delivered on the local orders, then they would send basically what was left to Phil Knight and Blue Ribbon. So they were getting the wrong shoe sizes, the wrong models, and this was obviously ruining their ability to sell and scale. And Phil was getting really frustrated. And this is one of the problems when you're building a business off of someone else's product, off of someone else's control. You do not own the ability to make changes, right? You don't truly own the customer service process. You can get complaints, so you can go back and bring them up, but you cannot control them. And this was a big frustration for Phil. So in 1970, he went to Japan to try to heal this relationship and try to fix it. So he wanted to have a tighter partnership and a longer term contract, get some stability and safety, because right now basically Onitsuka could pull out at any time, and he was afraid that that might happen. Onitsuka, on the other hand, at this point are looking at Blue Ribbon kind of like the banks do, right? They're a high-risk business. They're growing like crazy, and we'll see how right they actually have about this in a moment here. So what Onitsuka's considering is diversifying. Instead of having their entire North American sales based on Blue Ribbon, they might want more. Because if we think about this from Onitsuka's perspective, Nike is essentially doubling their revenue every year. That also means they need twice as many shoes every year. This is forcing Onitsuka to ramp up their operations, which is great. Every company loves to expand. But with Nike being at such risk, where if the bank just pulls the credit, they're in trouble. Well, Blue Ribbon could go under at any time. And if that happens, then Onitsuka that have expanded to be able to fulfill what Blue Ribbon would be doing would all of a sudden maybe have to fire people, would be in financial trouble of themselves because they're investing in their equipment. And the thing is, Onitsuka doesn't own the client relationships. Blue Ribbon does. So yes, there are lots of Tiger shoes all across the United States now, but Tiger, Onitsuka do not have that relationship. So they are afraid as well. Well, so he gets to Japan. Well, first to Tokyo, then goes down to Kobe to meet with the Onitsuka team. And there is a new manager, a man called Kitami, who has taken over. And he isn't as open and forthcoming as Mr. Miyazaki. Sorry, that's my Karate Kid references again. Mr. Miyazaki had been. But they do hammer out a 3-year deal. The next year, though, in 1971, Kitami comes to America. And if you've read the book Shoe Dog, there is a whole segment about this that is really interesting. So Kitami comes to Portland, Oregon, and he sees their offices, and he is not impressed. He does not think this is an interesting, like he's greatly underwhelmed by this. And he's already decided to look for more distributors, but this kind of enhances this. And there is a story there about how Phil actually, when Kitami leaves the room, actually steals a file from Kitami's bag that shows that he is actually actively looking for other distributors, which this will come back when this relationship falls apart. In this negotiation, Kitami says, look, they want more control, they want more security, and he offers to buy 51% of Blue Ribbon and take control. Now, this is not where Nike wants to be, of course, but Phil doesn't feel like he can properly say no to Kitami, so he says, let me think about this. So this is a rough situation here for both parties, right? Kitami is looking at this and going, well, this company could go under at any time. If so, our entire United States distribution falls apart. All this scaling we've done, it puts it as at a financial risk. We want to take ownership of this business and make sure that if they run out of money, we can pump in money and make sure it's safe. Phil obviously realizes now they're trying to replace him. They're planning to diversify from him. They haven't been delivering on their promise. Like, both parties are really frustrated. And of course, to put fuel on the fire, as in 1972, sales hit $1.3 million. And First National Bank celebrates this by closing their credit and account. Now, Phil is in real trouble because they're about to go out of business. And if they cannot find a new source of credit, they will not be able to make their payments. They will not be able to order more shoes, and the business is over. Luckily, he is able to get a contact with Bank of California, a man called Harry White, who, like, Phil takes this meeting really well. He doesn't try to hide things. He doesn't try to, smooth over. He goes in and is completely honest. He shows the growth they've had. He shows the orders they've placed, the shoes they have, and explains the problem. And Harry White offers a small line of credit, basically just enough to save their company. Now, we're going to get into what the next step is in a moment, but basically what all this does to Phil is he realizes we need to diversify away from Onitsuka. We need to take control. We need our own manufacturing. And this is how Nike really starts to open up and become Nike. Now, running is exploding across the United States, much because Bowerman, in addition to being that mad scientist, in 1967, he came out with the shoe running or jogging, and it sold over 1 million copies. And he goes on shows all over the place. And what it does is it creates this new wave of runners. And you might remember from our first episode, right? Runners were weirdos back before that. The people would throw things at them when they were running. But the book Jogging all of a sudden makes it mainstream and gets people out. Now, what Phil gets frustrated about, the book does not mention Blue Ribbon or their shoes. And even he says, Bowerman says in the book, your gears, your shoes don't matter. Just go out and run. Now, Phil is like, well, what are we doing? We're literally a shoe company. You say they don't matter. But Bowerman was thinking, another dimension on this, because he realizes if people just get out the door and start running and get used to it, of course they're going to want better shoes. Of course they're going to want running shoes. He just wants to create the habit. So he makes it easy. And even though Phil is frustrated, it kind of works out. So they start thinking about, we need our own brand. And this starts to work with the creation of Nike. But before that, they need funding and they need another place for manufacturing. And luckily, Phil finds a company called Nisho Iwai. So Nisho Iwai is a Japanese trading company. So a Japanese trading company is basically a huge Japanese conglomerate that has funding and all kinds of different business interests and partnerships with others. And so what they do is they open up doors to create partnerships between these Japanese companies and with partners in the United States and other countries. And so it's a brilliant way to grow their portfolio of companies. So when they find out that Nike, or Phil, who's creating Nike, is in this situation, the contact there, a man called Sumuragi, he agrees first to help finance, give a new line of credit to Blue Ribbon, with the knowledge that, of course, he's going to be using that line of credit to go and buy manufacturing in Japan, which stimulates the economy and the conglomerate that is Nisho Iwai. So it's a win-win situation here. So they go together to Japan and they look at all these different manufacturing plants and they find one called Nippon Rubber. And Phil tells this story in Shoe Dog. It's so interesting how, they're showing around the plant, and he's brought one of their Cortez shoes, one of their Tiger Cortez shoes. And so in the morning, he brings it up and he shows it to them. They, their engineers take a look at it, and then they spend the rest of the day together. By the end of the day, they have a Tiger Cortez shoe, but a Nike version that Nippon Rubber has built by the end of the day. And it blows Phil away how quickly they move and how much they want this. Now, it's not perfect, but it's good. And that's all he wants at that point. So at this point, they have an idea. They have they have the make for the shoe. They have the manufacturer. They are pushing to get the shoes out for their Cortez, but they need a name. And they're debating it back and forth in the office over and over the course of multiple days. And Phil leans towards one, the team for another. And then the last day, the deadline, Jeff Johnson walks into the office and says, I had a dream last night. I got it. And everyone's like, okay, Nike. And Phil is like, I don't like it. But everyone's like, yeah, let's go with Nike. And finally, Phil's like, oh, all right, we need to put something on there. Yes, let's do it. At the same time, so that's the auspicious beginning of the name Nike. At the same time, their designer, Caroline Davidson, has been creating versions of the logo. And again, they weren't happy, but finally they kind of go, well, the Nike swoosh is good enough. We'll take that for now. That's okay. She got paid $35 to make that, by the way. But actually later she does get equity in the company, and from last I heard, she hadn't sold it, and that's now worth millions. So technically she did get paid millions for the Nike swoosh, but actual salary, the payment for it was 35. Now, when they're launching these shoes, it is so funny because they're at one of these big trade shows where all the latest shoes are coming out. So they're showing off their Nike Cortezes, and they've put them all in these big orange boxes so they stand out, and they're really bad. Like, this first delivery from Nippon Rubber is really, really low quality. And Phil is, oh no, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? But they're out there presenting, and the different sales reps and buyers for the different department stores and stuff are coming by, and they're looking at the shoes, and they're actually placing orders. And Phil doesn't understand what's going on, and finally he goes up to me. He's like, "What are you doing? These shoes are awful. What are you talking about?" and the reps kind of go, "Well, look, guys, you've always been honest with us. You've always been upfront. You're never trying to pull the wool over our eyes. I mean, this is your first run. If you say they're going to get better, we trust you. So you're fine." And Phil comes back to the stand with the other guys like, telling the truth. Huh. Guess that works. So more and more of these reps come around, and they're looking at the shoes, and they're looking at the boxes, and they start asking, like, what is this logo? And they're like, oh, it's the Nike logo. Nike, what's that? That's our new brand. Oh, okay. Well, so what is the logo? Well, it's the Nike swoosh. And they're like, what's a swoosh? And Phil just says, it is the sound when somebody passes you. It just came spontaneously, and everyone goes, whoa, like they love it. And that's what the Nike swoosh is. That's the sound when somebody passes you. And that starts to become, the aura around Nike. So in 1972, they announced the Nike Cortez, and the split is really happening now with Onitsuka, and it's just going to get worse. They launched the same design, which is called the Tiger Corsair, and at the same a little later, remember the waffle shoe story we told last episode? Well, that comes out now as the Moon shoe and appears in the 1972 Olympic trials. Now, Phil is really starting to go, all right, look, we got something. We have the opportunity. He wants to go straight after Puma. He wants to go after the giant Adidas, sorry. They need wider credibility. So let's look at the industry, how it's going now. Adidas is the big giant. They have all the players. They have the entire market. And Adidas was started by Adi Das, a German gentleman. His brother, whose first name I always forget, they had this big fight and breakup, and he went on to create Puma. So it's these two German brothers that basically own the entire industry globally at this point. And they're competing about athletes, they're competing about endorsements, and this is basically the industry. Now, obviously, Tiger has been growing, much thanks to the help of Blue Ribbon. And now Phil is coming into the market going, well, we got this new brand, Nike. We have our sales team. We have our one location, but we also have the ability to get it out into stores. It is time for us to start really growing. Their sales have reached over $1 million a year. And they think about, how do we expand further? So Nike, or Phil, realizes they need their brand to get the credibility that it is legit. And the only way that you could do that back then was through the athletic sponsorships. So he starts thinking about, where should we get the right sponsor? Because the problem was, a lot of the athletes, they would warm up and they would train in Tiger or Nike shoes. But then when there was time to compete, they would use their sponsors, right? Their Adidas or their Puma shoes. And that was what people would see on TV, and that's what they would then go out and buy. So Phil decided they needed to get athletes, and he decided that their first target should be a tennis player, which is strange because they're a running company. Well, tennis gets a lot more TV time, and they get a lot more zoom on different parts of the players. So the shoes would be in TV more. Now, there was a player back then called Nastase. He was a Romanian tennis player, one of the best. He won the US Open in 1972. In 1973, he became the number one ranked player in the world. He was known to be emotional, theatrical, and rebellious. And he already played using Nikes. So Phil calls his agent and they strike a deal for Nike to sponsor him and make sure that that is all he would use. And the deal was for $10,000, which, you know, you're thinking about $1 million of annual revenue. But for Nike, that were so much on the edge at all times, this is a big, big bet. But they say, all right, we're going to do this because it's going to prove that we are a serious and real company. Next week, we're going to look at how Nike actually sues Onitsuka. This is probably the biggest risk zone in Nike's history that we're going to talk about. They are in for the fight of their lives. They are about to go under. And Prefontaine comes in as the white knight and saves the day. I'm going to tell you all about Pre. They get cost out of another bank, by the way, Nike, and they continue to grow year over year until they meet a young basketball player who changes everything. So next week, I will introduce you to Michael Jordan. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as always, I want to give you a gift before we wrap up. I want to invite you to the Freedom Shift events that we have in July. We have one for the European time zone, one for the North American time zone. We have an absolutely amazing lineup of speakers. You're going to be learning from 30 speakers over 4 days, including Dr. John DeMartini, Joseph McClendon III, Les Brown, Jack Canfield, Nick Vujicic, Marcy Shimoff, Janet Atwood, John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, Mark Victor Hansen, who co-wrote The Chicken Soup for the Soul, Brian Tracy, and Rob Moore. And of course, even more absolutely amazing speakers. So you can claim your free ticket in the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next week.